I'm going to go ahead and start the recording on the Photographer's Guide to Death Valley, and I'm going to make Kirby the presenter, and then we'll be ready to roll. So here we go. We'll make Kirby the presenter here. All right, Kirby, it's on its way. And I'll tell you when your desktop comes up, and then you'll be ready to roll. There you are, sir. You're all set. All right, Kirby, you're on.
Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to my webinar on Death Valley and how to photograph it. Death Valley is the land of extremes, lowest, hottest, dry spot in the U.S. Badwater is the lowest spot in North America at minus 282 feet. The highest recorded air temperature in the world was 134 degrees at Furnace Creek. Surrounded by mountains on all sides, the Death Valley gets very little rain, some years none at all. Despite that, there's usually a flood every year, and there was a bad flood last October, wiping out the road to Scotty's Castle and part of Scotty's Castle itself. So anything can and does happen there, depending on the weather. So in planning your trip, the weather is something you have to take into account. First, we'll talk about when to go and how to get there. Winter's obviously the best. Summers are hot and miserable. The nearest airport is McCarran Airport in Las Vegas, which is about 118 miles away from the valley floor. Otherwise, you're in for a long drive from any other major population center. Once you get to the Death Valley area, resources are very, very limited. The nearest town is Beatty, Nevada, with a population of 1,010 folks, or over on the west side, Lone Pine is a town of 2,035 folks. So when you're doing your planning, you should plan to pick up your supplies in Las Vegas before you head out, or buy them in Beatty before you head into the valley. Things like gas are at least $1 a gallon more in the valley, although they're available in the Furnace Creek area. Supplies are limited also in the Death Valley, so again, Beatty's a good place to stock up. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a actual grocery store, but there is a convenience store that's pretty well stocked for most of the usual stuff anyway. Beatty's up here on the northeast corner of the park. This is the road that brings you in from Las Vegas, and then Highway 190 is the main road that goes through the park over to the west to Panamint Springs, and down to the southeast through the central part of the park where most people spend their time. Where to stay? There are motels in the park at Furnace Creek. There's the Furnace Creek Inn and Furnace Creek Ranch. And further into the park, there's Stovepipe Wells. Furnace Creek Inn is very expensive. Furnace Creek Ranch is pretty much middle of the road, and Stovepipe Wells is pretty basic. When I stayed there, I stayed at the ranch, and when I went with Mark, we stayed at Stovepipe Wells. The ranch has a typical mid-range motel complex with the usual amenities, including a restaurant and gift shop / general store. In Panamint Springs on the west side, there is a resort, which I've not stayed at, but based on what I've read, it too is very basic. Outside the park, you're pretty much limited to Beatty, which has a Motel 6, a casino with rooms, and a couple of RV parks. Just to reorient you, there are 3 main roads in the valley. Highway 190 is the main road. It runs Stovepipe Wells over here to Panamint Springs and over to 395, and then goes south, kind of southeast actually, down into the valley and end up right about here, although it's not marked on the map. Other than that, there are roads going up to Beatty. There are roads going up to Scotty's Castle, and then roads going down to Badwater region. So if you stick to the main roads, you're usually okay. If you get off on the dirt roads, you're basically on your own. Weather we talked about a little bit. It's hot, dry, and windy at times. So average high 60s, 70s, and low 80s by March. And then it cools down again in November and December. You can see the record highs are quite high, especially in the summertime. So that's not a good time to be there. The good news is there's lots of sunshine. The bad news is that it can get quite cold and windy in the wintertime, January, February, or March, which Mark and I experienced when we were there years ago. What to bring? Clothing should be worn in layers, just like most places in the West. You start off with cold mornings, typically almost anywhere in the West, but certainly in Death Valley. But it may warm up into the 70s and 80s by the middle of the day, even in the winter. So having layers that you can add and subtract and peel off when needed is definitely the way to go. A windbreaker comes in handy because the wind may pick up at any time during the day. As far as photo gear is concerned, the requirements are fairly basic. You want a tripod, of course. You want 2 bodies if you have them. You're a long ways from anywhere where you can get anything repaired, for sure. Lenses should include ones in the range of 24 to 70, 70 to 200, and a macro lens if you have one. A reflector or diffuser comes in handy to try to moderate the light later in the morning. Supplies. You need to bring lots of water. I usually carry a case of half-liter bottles of water anytime I'm traveling in the desert. Snacks, which I mentioned, getting in Beatty. If you get hungry, you won't be able to concentrate on your photography, and give up sooner than you might otherwise. You want sunscreen for sure, your personal meds, and I should have mentioned under clothing that you want a hat to protect you. As you would expect anywhere, photographing or photography is weather dependent. The main issue in Death Valley is the wind. It can cause minor dust storms or major dust storms in some instances. It can be uncomfortable enough that you don't want to be out in it. And the other major issue is the sun, of course, and the heat. So the best and easiest time to photograph is certainly at sunrise. The light is the best. However, it only lasts for an hour or so in the morning and in the evening, even in winter. After that, the light gets very bright, harsh, and contrasting. There are some options for photographing during the day, and we'll explore some of those as we go along. I should mention, before we go on too much further, that there are some safe practices that are good for travel anywhere in the West, but especially in Death Valley. As I mentioned, carrying water, at least a minimum of 2 liters of water with you at all times, is a good practice. If you decide to leave the pavement for some reason, be prepared to be on your own for an extended period of time if something goes wrong. Cell service is very limited, usually around the areas like Furnace Creek or Stovepipe Wells. In between, you may not have any. If your car does break down, then you should stay with your vehicle and stay in the shade. And of course, keep yourself well hydrated. It's well to carry a map and compass. The car GPSs are notably unreliable in the park, and people have gotten themselves into serious problems trying to follow the GPS. Finally, let somebody know where you're going and when you expect to be back, so somebody will be looking for you if you don't get back when you're expected. For sunrise photos, there's 3 main locations. Mesquite Dunes is the most famous and well-known and most often photographed. Take a look at that first. Just for orientation, if you're staying at Stovepipe Wells, it's just to the east in about 10 minutes. If you're over here in the Furnace Creek area, then you've got to drive up here, and it can take 20 to 30 minutes. So plan on that. No matter how early you get there in the morning, there's always who's there ahead of you. You can see this little guy up here on the dune. People do lend perspective. If you find them distracting, of course, you can always clone them out. You can tell there have been people up here before by all the footprints in the sand, which if it does get windy, you'll tend to blow those away, of course. You should plan to arrive at Mesquite Dunes parking lot about 60 to 90 minutes before dawn. It can take you a half hour at least just to walk to the dune that you've chosen or to find one that you want to photograph from. Plus you have to climb the dunes, and it's more effort and they're much higher than they look from the road. So allow yourself plenty of time. As I said before, the light gets harsh fairly quickly after sunrise. So being there early is a big advantage. There are a lot of dunes and a lot of perspectives to shoot from. They're constantly changing, so if you've even been there before, then it won't look the same the next time you're there. Aside from the dunes, there's lots of opportunities for intimate landscapes, and they can be just as interesting as the dunes themselves, and they're less often photographed, so it can provide you something unique from your visit. Even the patterns in the sand can be interesting, with shadows and rocks adding further interest and contrast. The next morning shot is Zabriskie Point. This means driving back to the Furnace Creek area and then heading south from there on Highway 190. It's probably a 45-minute drive from the Mesquite Dunes. You get nice soft light on it early in the morning. There's lots of color and contrast and shapes to photograph. You can easily spend an hour photographing here and not have to photograph anything twice. Another shot from Zabriskie Point, looking to the south. More shapes, more contrasts, more interest points. The nice thing is that it's a short walk from the parking lot. It is uphill, but only gently uphill, so even us old guys can make it up there without too much trouble. Further south from Zabriskie Point, there are playa, desert playa, dried out, cracked sand and mud, which can provide interesting patterns along with the rocks scattered on them. So as you're driving 190 back and forth, look for things alongside the road in addition to the major sites that everybody goes to, and sometimes you can find things that are really interesting or maybe even more interesting than the spots that everybody goes to. The 24 to 70 lens works well at Zabriskie Point. You can use a 70 to 200 as well if you want some really intimate details. Lots of possibilities there, so having both would be a definite plus. Badwater Basin, 282 feet below sea level. It's hard to get any photos here that don't include people, even if you get there relatively early in the morning, and by mid-morning it's a lost cause if you want photos without people. If you want to get the classic photo of the salt crystals on the playa, then you've got a long distance hike ahead of you. As you can see, these people walking out towards the Panamint Mountains in the background. It's a good hike out there. Depends how badly you want that particular photo, I guess. The other option is to photograph the area from on high. This photo was taken from the parking lot at Natural Arch Canyon, looking to the west and getting another perspective. The Panamint Mountains are getting in the background. That's Telescope Peak, which is the highest peak in the park at 11,000 plus feet. If you're lucky and get there in a good year, you have the opportunity to photograph lots of wildflowers. The valley is covered in wildflowers of many varieties. These are just a couple. And the flowers in bloom change almost daily during the season. These mega blooms only occur every few years and depend heavily upon the weather, not only just rain, but rains at the right times for the seeds to germinate and then grow into something special. If you're interested in hitting that wildflower bloom, there are a couple of resources that are helpful in following what's going on in the West and in Death Valley in particular. You can read them on the slide yourself. Desert USA is a great resource for all kinds of natural events going on in the West and also for Western history, if that's of interest to you. Natural History Wanderings is a compiler of other websites and includes things like flower blooms and other happenings in all over the West, really, and sometimes even some of the more eastern locations. It's a great resource, and he sends out an almost daily newsletter to update you on what's going on, if that's of interest to you. Although in a good year like this year, you can find flowers all through the valley. I found when I was there this spring that the densest populations and the most variety were in this sort of triangle formed by Mud Canyon Road, Highway 190, and the Beatty Cutoff. So you can make a loop and find many opportunities for photographing wildflowers, either singly as above or in more of a panorama. The flowers are not nearly as close together as you might imagine from seeing some of the photos on the internet. They look close together in the distance, but as you walk up to them, you find they're 4 to 6 inches apart everywhere. So if you want that field of flowers look, then you need to use a long lens, something in at least the 200 millimeter range to get that effect. If you're interested in flowers in particular, there's a great resource called Mojave Desert Wildflowers, a field guide, and that can be found in well, it can be found on Amazon, of course, but it can also be found in the visitor store gift shop at Furnace Creek area. Again, it's best to be there early in the morning. As any flower photographer knows, the wind is your enemy. And most of these flowers are fairly long stalked, so that even a gentle breeze will start to have them dancing in the wind for you. What to do in the midday? There are several options. As you could tell from the map, there are a lot of side canyons off the main roads, some of which are quite beautiful and provide shade in the deeper canyons that will allow photography even in mid-morning. The first one I'd like to mention is Artist Drive. That's a loop drive off of the Badwater Road, and you can spend hours photographing on this road. The most beautiful part of it, in my opinion anyway, is the artist's palette. There's a parking lot there. You can get out and hike through the rock formations and find an endless variety of compositions, this one being one of my favorites. The colors back there are amazing, and if the light's still fairly gentle, you can get some beautiful color in the rocks. Golden Canyon is another side canyon on the Badwater Road. It gets its name from the golden color of the canyon when it's in soft light. As you would expect, as the light comes up and hits the canyon walls, it tends to wash out the gold color. But if you can hit it right, it's quite beautiful. Another possibility for midday is Natural Bridge Canyon. It's sort of an arch, but more of a bridge, I guess. Again, you have the opportunity to photograph in the canyon if you're careful where you pick your spots and try to avoid partially lit sidewalls. HDR can be helpful in this sort of situation, or you may end up having to do a lot of post-processing. Another shot from Natural Arch Canyon with some nice soft light on the rocks, the canyon walls itself, but pretty brightly lit. Near the top of the screen. Any of these locations get very busy as the morning wears on. So again, if you don't want people in your photos, you have to get there earlier in the morning. But sometimes it can provide an additional interest in the photo and can provide some perspective. These people just happened to wander in, and I decided they'd add something to the shot. If you wait until late morning, you may not even be able to get into this parking lot. Another possibility is Titus Canyon. This is not for the faint of heart. This shows the road heading up over the mountain, eventually going up through here to get to the canyon itself. It's a narrow one-way dirt road. It was reasonably well maintained when I was there a couple years ago in the spring. But like many of these dirt roads, with use, they get to be washboard. So in addition to the curves and the narrowness and drop-offs, you have to deal with the washboard road at times. Once you get over the top of the mountain, going down the other side is even steeper with several hairpin turns. You're probably better off with a short wheelbase vehicle if possible. I did make it with my crew cab pickup, although it was pretty tight in spots and again fairly narrow and nice steep drop off to your left as you're driving into the canyon. Your reward for all of this is some beautiful rock formations of varied colors, which contrast with the green and gold desert scrub, making for a pleasing composition, I should say. in my eyes at least. Once you get in the canyon, there are remains of the ghost town of Leadfield. The sign is pretty self-explanatory. It was a number of people were swindled into moving there and probably lost everything. It only lasted about a year and a half, as you can see from the signs. And there's not a whole lot left to see, although there are still some interesting remnants of buildings like this one to photograph. Lots of other rock formations to photograph in the canyon as you drive through it. The exit to the canyon, the last couple of miles, is extremely narrow and windy and with very steep cliffs. Unfortunately, there's not any great place to pull off. There's only one or two pullouts in that exit route, and if somebody else is pulled in there, you're not going to get in behind them. So the only other option is to come all the way out and hike back in. You can drive up to this end of the canyon also from Highway 190, or I'm sorry, rather from Skives Castle Road. But you can, from there you have to hike. So if you're up for a big hike, that's another approach for this. If you're into ghost towns, there's another opportunity that's outside the park. Actually, it's about 5 miles west of Beatty, the remnants of the town of Rhyolite. It was rather late in the gold rush period, gold being discovered there in 1904. There was the usual gold rush with 2,000 claims filed, as noted. It only lasted about 3 years in terms of good returns, although there are some, there are hundreds of thousands of dollars of gold mined and milled in this town. But the town came to its end in 1916, and well, there are some interesting remains, like this bottle house, which is built entirely of bottles. Apparently the guy liked his wine or beer. And you can walk around it, can't walk into it. There's a little yard adjacent. And this is probably the most well-maintained structure that's left there. Aside from the bottle house, there are multiple other structures. There's an old train station. Unfortunately, it's behind a fence, and so trying to photograph it is a challenge at best. It would be really interesting if it were restored and if the chain link fence was taken down, but in the times I've been there since 2009, it's stayed much the same. There were a couple bank buildings. There was a school. There were, of course, the brothels and the bars, but those are largely gone. There was a railroad spur that came in, and this caboose is apparently left over from those days. And near the entrance to the area, there's a kind of funky museum off to the left. If you're interested in that kind of thing. Not much to do with Rhyolite, but some interesting sculptures and basically a small sculpture garden. Sunset options are not, or are fairly limited, really. Dante's View being the best in my mind. This is off Highway 190, driving south past Zabriskie Point. It's a steep climb, up a 14-mile road with hairpin curves at the top, but really not too bad. You just have to take it slow, and it can take you a half hour to make that 14-mile drive easily. Again, getting there late afternoon before the sun sets can provide some really beautiful light on the rock formations, as you see here, with the Badwater Basin in the background and some of the Panamint Mountains across the way. The other option is to photograph the Badwater Basin itself, looking down on it. There's a ridge that you can walk out on that's probably a half a mile in length and various perspectives from there. It's a bit of a climb and a hike, but nothing bad. I can easily do it, so I'm sure any of you could. The thing that you're fighting at Badwater Basin or at Dante's View is the haze, which usually comes in late afternoon, probably from Las Vegas, I'm guessing. But the new dehaze filter in Lightroom does a pretty nice job of clearing most of that out. So I was pretty pleased with this once I applied the dehaze filter. If you have time in your travels, there are a couple places around Las Vegas that are well worth visiting. One is Red Rock Canyon, which is off the highway that takes you up to Death Valley, and there's some beautiful rock formations. There's a 13-mile drive. There's a very nice visitor center built by the BLM. So you could spend the day exploring all the canyons and doing some hiking and taking some great photographs. This one was actually taken on the road to Red Rock Canyon, but shows some of the red rock in the background and a Joshua tree with fruit in the foreground here. This is actually the fruit of the tree rather than the flower, I think. The other option is Valley of Fire, which is east of Las Vegas, or kind of northeast of Las Vegas, but an easy enough drive. Lots of interesting rock formations, once again, best in morning light, I think. Lots of places to explore. Again, you could spend the day here without any trouble at all. That brings me to the end of the presentation. I hope you found it useful. I've placed some references at the end here, which will be in the notes that you get from Mark. They'll give you more information about the area and list some of the newsletters and blog posts that I mentioned during the discussion. At this point, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them as best I can.
Thanks, Kirby. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, if you would post them, and I'll read them to Kirby and see if he can answer them for you. I have to give kudos out to Bill Naiman. Bill is sitting in some parking lot listening to the presentation on his iPad via his hotspot off his phone. So now that's dedication. He wanted to be here, so and actually that works. I've done it. I've actually listened to some webinars, not ours, of course, but other webinars while I've actually been driving, and you could hear them on my, hear them through my phone and what have you. So it's quite possible if you're not at home, you can still pick up the webinar. So good job, Bill. Joe Ladendorf says, thanks, Kirby. Any questions for Kirby whatsoever? I'll second the kudos about the dehaze filter. I think the dehaze filter, in my opinion, is one of the best additions to Lightroom in recent updates. It works great, especially when you have those hazy mountain pictures, which I got a few around here every once in a while. It works great on those and just works great in other photos. Try it. If you don't like it, then take it back to 0, but it really works really well. And that's only available in the cloud Creative Cloud version of Lightroom. It's not available in the one that you buy over the counter. So, but it works really well. Use it all the time, actually. So that's great. Also, too, I sent you guys a message that Death Valley is 3.3 million acres versus Yellowstone.